Hi, all. Mimi Rocah here for Talking Feds. I wanted to talk to you today about something that you may have missed because there's such a overwhelming amount of news, and I guess relatively speaking, this is small. Nothing is small, but I want to tell you why it's important. This week, 3 more prosecutors submitted a joint letter of resignation in the Southern District of New York in relation to the case that I'm sure you do recall hearing about, the Eric Adams prosecution by the Southern District of New York. If you recall, just very, very briefly, DOJ had tried to get SDNY to drop that case, basically as part of a political deal between the White House via DOJ and Adams. The acting U.S. attorney at the time, Danielle Sassoon, refused to do that because it would violate her ethical obligations, and she resigned. That was now, 2 months ago, maybe. And then subsequently, another prosecutor, Hagen Scotton, who was one of the lead prosecutors on the Adams case, also resigned. And both of them wrote Danielle wrote a long, they both wrote very compelling letters of resignation that I really urge you to read if you haven't already. And I and other Talking Feds people have talked and written about them. So what happened this week, though, is there had been 3 additional prosecutors working on the case. It was a big case. So there were many prosecutors assigned to it. And they had been put on leave by the Department of Justice. Not just put on leave, but they had been administrative leave. But they had been really unceremoniously just sort of kicked out of the building, escorted out by marshals back right around the time that Sassoon and Hagen Scotton resigned. And so they were still technically employed, but they were not at the office. And now what we've learned from their letter, these 3 prosecutors, is that they were trying to essentially negotiate a way to come back to the office. They didn't want to be on leave. They wanted to keep doing their jobs. Why? Because they love their jobs. These are prosecutors who, I actually know them well enough to say, people, first of all, almost anyone in the Southern District of New York has probably had a lifelong dream of being a federal prosecutor, of serving the people, of upholding the Constitution. And they were not looking to leave their jobs. But what they were told was the only way you can come back to your job here is if, and I'm going to look at their letter now and just read it to you. They say, one of the preconditions you, Todd Blanch at the Department of Justice, the Deputy Attorney General, have placed on our returning to the office is that we must express regret and admit some wrongdoing by the office, the Southern District of New York, in connection with refusal to move to dismiss the case. Okay, so let's just break that down. They were told by the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanch, and I'm sure with the approval of Pam Bondi and others, that they had to say that Danielle Sassoon, the acting U.S. attorney, was wrong to resign rather than dismiss in front of a judge the Adams prosecution for political reasons, that they were being asked to dismiss it. That this is really astounding, right? So now on top of the crazy act of trying to get a prosecutor's office to dismiss a case as part of a political deal, we now have them trying to coerce prosecutors, line prosecutors, not even the appointees, but the line prosecutors who are asked to work on all different kinds of cases all the time, confess to some wrongdoing that Todd Blanch, Pam Bondi, President Trump, everybody else knows these prosecutors do not believe. Because it's not true, first of all. And in fact, we have a judge, Judge Ho, who made a ruling in this case that I'm pretty sure I talked about at one point and others have talked about, where he said, a federal judge made a finding after doing all sorts of factual analysis and deep dives. He made a finding that there was nothing improper about the Adams prosecution, that it had not been brought originally for improper reasons, and that the reasons for trying to dismiss it were purely political and wrong. So now you have the Department of Justice leadership trying to get prosecutors to say something completely contrary to what a judge has found, completely contrary to their beliefs, completely contrary to what is actually true and to their ethical oaths. We have come so far down the rabbit hole of corruption at DOJ that it is hard to even put it into words. And I get very passionate about this because I worked at the SDNY for almost 17 years. And I grew up there just like these prosecutors, hearing every day the thing that they cite in their letter, which has now become this sort of mantra of there is no greater privilege to work for an institution whose mandate is to do the right thing in the right way for the right reasons. We will not abandon this principle to keep our jobs. We resign. And so I think it is so important to keep up, lifting up the stories of these lawyers who are doing the right thing, who are giving up at great personal sacrifice. These people love their jobs. They didn't want to leave their jobs. And we, frankly, as the public, need them in their jobs because there are hugely important cases to our country that should be done and should be done by people like them who are experienced, passionate, dedicated prosecutors, dedicated to the rule of law and the Constitution, not a particular man, the president, which is what the Bondi DOJ wants. And I just want to say one other personal note, and I urge you to read their whole resignation letter where they talk about their oath to uphold the Constitution. I mean, this is all very, maybe a little bit vague and abstract to some people, but it is so important. And I'm trying to get you to think about the people behind these actions, because this doesn't happen overnight. They were trying to get DOJ to be reasonable and they wouldn't. And the one other personal note I want to mention before I sign off is, I knew Todd Blanch, and I use the word knew very purposefully in the past tense. He was someone I worked very closely with at SDNY. I knew him from before he was a prosecutor. He was a paralegal, and he actually was my co-chief for about 2 years in the office, heading up the White Plains Division. He is not in any way, shape, or form the person that I knew, because no person that I knew and worked with in the way that I worked with Todd could ask prosecutors to do this, to violate their beliefs, to violate their oaths, to violate a judge's order to get their jobs back. And I am so proud of them, these prosecutors, for standing up. And I am so ashamed that someone from the Southern District of New York, Todd Blanch, is helping to orchestrate this corruption of DOJ. And I hope he finds his way back. I don't have confidence that he will, but I hope that he does. So thanks for listening. I urge you to read the resignation letters of all of these attorneys, if nothing else, because I think they really poured their hearts and souls into them. And maybe we can provide some links or something. All right, Mimi Rocah for Talking Feds. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.